everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the first in a new series of virtual events hosted by Harvard's Graduate School of Design Alumni Council. My name is Michelle Cramer MAUD 99, and I'm privileged to represent the Alumni Council and Design Impact Committee in introducing this Global Design Leadership Speaker Series. These virtual events bring together an outstanding roster of global leaders, many of them alumni, to share their work and vision, challenging us as a global community to use design as a tool for actionable, transformative change and healing. I'm also pleased to present today's topic of Places Left Behind, which will explore the intersection of spatial design, architecture, landscape architecture, and urban planning, as well as urban policy in addressing inequity and fostering regeneration. I'm hosting today from Sydney, Australia, and before we begin, and in the spirit of Places Left Behind, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation on whose land, sea, and sky I'm located tonight, my time, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. We are truly a global community, and I'm delighted to share that we have registrations for this event from over 25 countries around the world. Welcome, everyone. For this event, we have 3 passionate alumni members, truly dedicated to their work and practice across the world, with stories to share on how they've been involved in projects that consider places left behind. I've been privileged to a sneak peek to these presentations, and I'm excited for these stories to inspire all of us on this call. So tonight we'll hear from Mark Johnson, MLAUD 82, Arthur Adeya MLA 06, and Zeerak Ahmed MDE 18. And we also have a couple of current GSD students joining us tonight. Victor Muturi MARC 28 and Spurty Kamath MDes 26, who will moderate between the speakers and share their own personal insights into what Places Left Behind means to them. And then finally, the Alumni Council Design Chair, Co-Chair, Stacey Pennington, will provide a vote of thanks and share what's next for this speaker series. But for now, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Mark Johnson. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and hello, everyone. I have to share and change my view, if it will allow me. There we go. So my name is Mark Johnson. I'm MLA UD 82, as Michelle said, and greetings from the Rocky Mountains of Colorado, where I live and have my office, but we work far afield. When this idea of Places Left Behind came up, I thought it was very intriguing because I've always been interested in the interface between human settlement and landscape as a landscape architect, that the operations by which people use the resources around them and settle upon an ecological structure, making those landscapes both productive for nature and productive for humans, is a topic of deep interest. So what I'm going to talk about this morning is a project that we've been working on in the Northern Czech Republic. It's an area which from time to time has been called the Czech Black Triangle, an area of coal production, in a town named Ústí nad Labem. And we have put forward for the region a vision of a long-term economic redevelopment of a region that's become depressed because the use of the landscape has become without meaning. Now, this project has many, many players. These are only some of them. But key to that are 2 firms, 4CT, an economics and planning firm in Prague, and a landscape ecologist named Zdeněk Sendler in Brno. The site sits here. You can see Dresden on the top, Prague on the bottom. So we're on a highway route, actually, directly between the 2 in the red circle, and you see Ústí nad Labem. And that, if you translate that from Czech, it actually means the confluence of the Elbe River. Here's the site in a much closer view. Beginning on the right, you see the bend in the river and how the mountains constrict so that the city comes from the river and moves out into the valleys and the hills from that point. Now, the river here goes from Prague all the way to Hamburg. And for at least 200 years, this site has been an inland port for goods coming from this region to meet the Baltic Sea and in return. On the left, you see the red circle and the lake. That is really the specific topic of this project. Here you see it, about 200 years ago in an Austrian map. Of course, this was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. On the upper left, you see the Ore Mountains, and those mountains hit this plain in a very interesting uplift where a series of hot springs line that interface between the valley and the mountains. On the right, you see the word Aussig. That was the Austrian word for Usti, so that's the same town. And of course, in red, the outline of the lake. Now, if you look at the line work, you can see there's a series of little streams and villages that lead from the mountains down to the river. So this ecological structure is an interface, a transition zone between a river valley that's hundreds of miles long and a mountain range of similar scale. And oftentimes in ecology, these ecotones, as you call them, the spaces between different ecological systems are the richest. So on the left here, I don't know the date of this picture, but you can see that this region with the mountains in the background was families settled with villages and little farms. We could maybe call it subsistence farming, but where the relationship between the scale of the human activity and the landscape is not too far out of balance, we might say. But on the right, in 1948, the Czech Republic became part of the Soviet Union, and that regime started to harvest the coal, which is in this region. That's why it's called the Black Triangle. And that created the importation of many, many workers, the arrival of industry, initially a soap factory, to the point where now Usti, this town, which you can see the setting is quite beautiful, is really an industrial city. But at this point in time, that industrial city has suffered quite a bit of decline because when the Soviet Union collapsed, the Czech Republic became independent in 1989, the mines were closed. So those workers who had come to work in the factories powered by the mine and the power plants associated with the mine have left a bit of a, I wouldn't say collapse, but a decline in that industrial and employment base. Here you see it today, very recent photographs. As you can see, it's beautiful, but the power plant still dominates the region. Excuse me, backwards. And here you see the specific relationship. You can't quite see the mountains in the background, but you have the Lake Melada, and the power plant in that tight relationship of a productive landscape producing coal, producing energy to produce these factories, jobs, and a local economy. Now, Usti itself today, as I said, it's been suffering climbing poverty rates, climbing unemployment, and it has some social challenges because even though if you look at the books, it'll say it's highly, highly Czech, that Czech population actually consists of people who have moved here from other countries within the last 200 years. And so the region today is actively trying to reignite its economy and figure out how it can become part of a future economy, a much healthier social condition. And our proposition as landscape architects is that begins with creating a healthier landscape and ecology. So our question was, how can this mine become a catalyst for a more sustainable future? So on the right, you see the city, the mountains in the background, the lake in the foreground. And I would ask you to look at the green space in the foreground to see how unusual it is. This is not a productive landscape. This is the revegetation of the mine with a very limited topsoil interface, with a very limited range of species. And what you have here is quite the opposite of a productive landscape. It's really a static landscape that's not providing much for carbon capture. It's not providing much in terms of wildlife habitat, and it's clearly not providing much for human occupation. Now, today, that mine is, as a lake, you can see what it actually looks like. It's somewhat well used, but there are 0 facilities. There's no water, no sewer, no power. There's no transit access. So people generally drive private vehicles here, set up shop, enjoy the beach and the lake, but it could be so much more. Here you really get an interesting, almost comical juxtaposition of the beauty of the water. And this water, by the way, is exceptionally clear and exceptionally clean. The lake is very, very deep, about 60 meters deep. And you can see how the revegetation of the hillside is just, you can virtually see the tractor pulling the seed drill, planting this uniform species of trees, and the juxtaposition of the power plant in the background. I find it kind of amusing. The region, though, as I mentioned, the hot springs line the mountains, and there are a series of historic spas. So for hundreds of years, this has been a place of wellness. So this is Carlo Vivari, which is a village tucked into the mountains, probably the most famous and elaborate of the spa towns. And there are already is quite a set of interesting recreation activities, from hiking, various kinds of skiing, various kinds of biking. There's a zoo, there's swimming, there's parachute jumping, there's equestrian facilities, there's golf, but they're dispersed and they're not in any way aggregated into a sense of a common place. They're all individual. At the same time, the efforts by the region to revive the economy have led to a proposal for a high-speed rail connecting Prague and Dresden, which part of our work was to get that high-speed rail connected directly into the city of Ústí with a station. And then, as you can see, the purple lines, which are cut off by the lake, that's an old rail line that used to serve the base of the mountains, which was cut off by the lake. Of course, we hope to re-energize that to provide rail access to the lake and its facilities. The core of our idea is to restore the landscape, improve the infrastructure, and reignite an economy that's based on outdoor recreation. Because you have so much recreation, when the people in Eastern Europe think of outdoor recreation, they tend to think of this region. So the big vision is to reclaim all the mines here as water and reestablish habitat, and to form this arc of recreation along the base of the mountains. Now, that begins with developing new portals of access to the lake itself. As I said, there are no facilities whatsoever. And then on the left, you see this sort of pink patch, the idea of bringing access to the west end of the lake to become the, let's call it the base camp for this broad range of recreation on a national and regional scale. And on the west, or the east rather, sorry, to develop the edges of the lake for more local and water-based recreation. And the big idea here is to create an ecotourism location that connects mountains, plains, water, habitat, and people. But as I mentioned, the landscape is unproductive. So here you see in this trapezoid how really kind of empty and sterile this landscape is. So most of our landscape architectural work here has been with Zdeněk Sendler, the ecologist, studying how we can manage this landscape, not reconstruct, but manage this landscape towards a much healthier, multi-layered mosaic of habitat types that support the new form of productivity of this damaged landscape, to take things that are plain and simple, and to take these landscape and bring them back to the kind of layered complexity of the historical condition that provides so much more landscape productivity in ecological and habitat terms, but also makes this much more available and present for recreation. So there's an overall landscape master plan, as you might imagine, which is about restoring this place. And of course, trails, trailheads, and many, many facilities to bring people gently into that place. But more importantly, the idea of beginning creative recreation venues within that landscape and connections to tie those together so that we create a destination where people of the region can come, begin their adventure or their experience and start to use the specific activity of the lake as the seed to grow this outdoor economy. Now, I know this picture is a little crazy, but it's not Photoshop. It's a real picture. People really do this in the winter. This is Lake MLAUD. And as you can see, the water is so clear. It has this unique clarity to the ice as well. And there are a lot of things that are happening here already. So it's not a crazy idea. You have these sort of races of every sort on foot, on wheels, of different kinds of wheels. You have a mecca for kite surfing already because of the open body of water in the mountains. There's great wind. So there's a lot of activity there. And all this got me thinking about where I live here in the Rocky Mountains, where we have developed a massive recreation economy. This is the town of Leadville. You can see what it used to look like on the left with the mines. Pretty unproductive landscape. And today it is a hub of a recreation and outdoor gear manufacturing center, as is our state. So our state today has dozens of global brands, and this has all emerged in the last 40 years. This was not true 40 years ago when I came here, but global brands, and you may recognize some of these brands, which have led to an outdoor industry here, 133,000 jobs, $17 billion of annual recreational production just from our state. And so why can't we begin to envision this in the Czech Republic? There's already, as I mentioned, the recognition that this region of the Czech Republic is becoming very slowly a destination for outdoor recreation, for engagement with nature. And of course, that requires that we repair that nature. And there's the beginning of an outdoor industry as well in terms of bike and clothing production for outdoor recreational uses. And our hope is that this can begin to expand and multiply in the way that it has here in the Rocky Mountains, so that the driver of the economy is actually the richness and productivity of the landscape itself. So I'm going to end with just a few boards that were part of the public exposition of this work. This work is still heavily under discussion, and the idea of using the lake is very, very present in the region. So this, of course, in Czech, it says a lake for everyone. So that richness, the introduction, a mosaic of recreation and places of the region. The idea of the celebrating nature and recreating nature and then welcoming people gently into that nature to participate in the experience that the productive landscape offers. And then thinking about the very long-term future as nature takes over and how this region becomes richer and richer because we're managing it properly. And then thinking about the details of how we create those healthy systems. I mean, look how rich the edge of the lake should be compared to that sterile gravel that you saw in the earlier vision. And lastly, to create a sense of place that really makes you feel like you are at home, that somewhere that you belong, and somewhere that will last, be durable and resilient. So thank you very much. I think Spurty, you're up.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. I'm Spurty Kamath. I'm a second-year Masters in Design student in the domain of ecologies. And thank you for your incredibly detailed presentation, Mark. The idea of developing productive landscapes by restoring the ecology of the region to pivot the economic hardships of the communities was indeed thought-provoking. But I'm curious to know, what does places left behind mean to you?
Well, you actually just said it when you said, what does it mean? As I thought about this, it was, I've been so privileged to be part of the dialogue leading up to this morning, because when you say places left behind, you tend to think of something physical, And obviously you see this big coal mine, and there it is. It's this big empty space. But the reason it's left behind is it no longer means something to people. Those family farms in the early picture, they were incredibly meaningful to the individuals, the families, and the community. And it's left behind because the erasure of that took away that meaning. And our job is to ask, how can we bring meaning back to this place so people will care for it and enjoy it?
Thank you, Mark, for your thought-provoking perspective. Your presentation was a stellar example of productive landscapes. And now we have Arthur presenting his own unique perspective of productive landscapes in a completely different context.
Thank you very much, and thank you all. Thank you all for joining us in this very interesting series, Design Impact. I will start by sharing my screen. Okay. I hope you can all see my screen now. All right. So I'm Arthur Adeya from Nairobi, Kenya, MLA 2006. And really, sorry, I want to start by saying this is particularly interesting and just the whole reflection on Places Left Behind. I think one of the things was figuring out how to do 15 minutes of Places Left Behind in Kenya. But let's see how this goes. The case study I will present, and I am actually saying case studies with an S in parentheses, is really work done by KDI, an incredible bunch, not-for-profit design and community development organization, which I will speak to a little bit more in due course. We partner with under-resourced communities left behind to advance equity, activate and realized potential in neighborhoods and cities. We have over 50 employees in 4 locations, Nairobi, Stockholm, Coachella, LA. But a lot of the work we'll be discussing will primarily be from the Nairobi office. And then just so many community partners, so many donor partners, so many technical partners, almost too many to speak of. Not almost, definitely too many to speak to just now. But I want to start by situating you with the view of a 12-year-old boy, maybe in 1986, and his view of the city, overcrowded public transport, rolling green hills, and downtown CBD silhouetted in the background. Fast forward, he's now an architecture student. He's struggling with the notion of low-income housing. And what that means, low-cost housing. It wasn't yet affordable housing at the time. And beginning to understand that justice really begins at the scale of a project. And a little further, beginning to look, and it's interesting to look at some of these numbers because it was 1975 to 2025. But perhaps the most significant sketch that he did back then was from Henry Barlow's poem, I Refuse to Take Your Brotherly Hand. Fast forward, same young man is now 2017 sketching one of the tallest buildings in Nairobi, KICC, beginning to look, sketch on the west, on the left is to the west of Nairobi, and thinking about Nairobi's moniker, Green City in the Sun, and beginning to think probably that's a little bit true. And then looking a little bit more centrally and with the rising skyscrapers and the CBD and maybe just a little green in the background. And perhaps it's still true that this is really about the green city in the sun. But then begin to look eastwards, and it's almost too difficult to capture the density of of buildings in the background, and then began to think really about the master plan for a colonial capital, which is what Nairobi was in 1948. And I kid you not, done up by a Professor L.W. White from the University of Cape Town. And it was really an experiment based on segregation, neighborhoods, but the neighborhoods were really about segregation, strongly based on the Garden City, hence the Green City in the sun. And now the context of that for Kibera in 1948. And this is Kibera, which was really initially Nubian villages. You can begin to see the Royal Nairobi Golf Club, and you'll see this a little bit as I progress. But the Nubian villages were from the Nubians who fought in World War I alongside the British and chose to settle back in Kenya when they returned. And then we overlaid the density of developments in 2015. And you can begin to see the engagement. And one of the things was Kibera was just south of the segregated city, where to the north was really for the whites and to the south was for the Black Africans. And I want to come to this image and maybe just pause here because I don't need to explain to you the boundaries and the edge of Kibera. The fabric can really begin, the urban fabric can really begin to speak to that. But I'll pause here a little bit just to explain an interesting condition. So Kibera was really land owned by the central government, and the then provincial administration had the power to allocate land for temporary use. The city administration, which was then the city council and now the city county, was under no obligation to provide services to temporary use, and also defined what temporary and semi-permanent materials would be. And that included adobe, corrugated iron sheets, and timber, but just figure. So some of the images you'll see of Kibera that I will share will really speak to what that means. And this density that you're seeing is really of single level dwellings, because with the type of technology and the lack of permanence meant that that was what could be done. In many ways, if we think about this, this is a truly engineered place left behind. And so over time, the people have had to figure out streets have become drainage, garbage disposal was not always appraised and not always collected. But in fairness, a lot of that has been moving forward, and I just wanted to make sure that I highlight that very early on, even before I begin to speak about the work. Lately, there's been a lot of work on upgrading, slum upgrading, and this has networked well with the work that KDI has done, which I will then speak to. But that said, this is an image from 2025 and flooding. And the kind of risks that happen in a location like this that was left behind. Right? But the people are still incredible. This is what they think of their own city, Kibera, God's great city. A city of I want to say 300,000 people on about 600 football fields, with maybe 2 football fields in Kibera, Kenya. And this is really where the concept of KDI was backed by Jen, Patrick, Ellen Koch, Shalina, and myself. And it was really the idea of to get to know someplace intimately. And I'll just go back and try and connect that to my earlier thoughts about architecture not being able, in low-income housing, architecture not being able to solve the problems. But the discovery that while The actual the space in terms of the space that would be allocated by the provincial administration meant that it was very difficult to build. Beginning to look at public space and engaging public space was an idea that KDI really backed. And this diagram from Jen and Shalina's thesis project, in that should have been 2007, a joint urban planning project that really began to look at creating a network of public spaces that started with the first in a highly contested riverine place. It was really at the end just coming into a dam, and all the trash should then be washed into that. And how this was transformed into a productive public space. And I'll speak to the key elements of the productive public space as I progress. So really looking at what physical, social, and economic meant, and always working with the community in a co-design process. And so what were the key things? Physical, we would always look at the green infrastructure, remediation, having riverbank remediation with gabions and flood risk, trash removal, and really looking at how people move through a site. An element like a very small bridge was a significant difference because it saved the amount of walking people might have to do, even at night when there was danger. Then social factors. Social was always important. Spaces for public assembly, for social programs, inclusive spaces, leadership and training. The pavilion that we did in Public Space 1 was eventually converted into a multifunctional community space. And then ultimately economic. Always had to have business, small business, savings and loans, vocational training, and community spaces. And this then really backed the Kibera Public Space project. Today, it's a network of 12 public spaces, all dealing with the same conditions. And I'll probably just try and run through one or two in a little bit more detail, but always in the riverine situation, difficult terrains, circulation, and all this converted through public engagement, through co-design process with the community and the incredible team that we have into a series of productive public spaces, always with the same three conditions that we speak of. But as we progress to that, and maybe just one of the things we always work with the community in skills upgrade, skills building. They're part of the co-construct process, and really that knowledge transfer that is then carried through into future projects and into the improvement of future individuals. So just very quickly, public space must have participation, integration, networked change. When talking about the economic field, is really how do you begin to network the various communities. And just to highlight very quickly, our stages always begin from a request for proposals from the actual community group. That already means that there's already a very keen stakeholder alignment. And then go to planning and design and implementation and operations. I'll just run very quickly through because I think I'm beginning to run out of time. This Andolo community project that was converted into a productive and floodable landscape at this particular point, beginning to look at how we'd have a community laundry pad, and that was, and a water kiosk, and those were really the economic aspects, the children's play area, social, a paved towpath, and really a before, and this is after, and beginning to create the sort of spaces that I'd spoken about earlier. Tuvuma, which was really a community group that already had sanitation facilities, but really mostly pit latrines, and working through a co-construction with the group. And I just wanted to highlight one of the interesting things here, because we then had a detention zone, we had rain gardens, and used, we actually tested soda crates to begin to look at, look at the filtration ponds and the detention ponds. This is Kibera Green Streets projects, and I'll just run through this one very quick. This is when our partnerships with the city really began to happen. Kenya Urban Roads needed to do a road here. They discovered they did not have the budget to navigate this terrain at the particular point. We worked together with them and the community group to convert that really into a transitory public space, looking at streets and parks with all the key elements that I've actually spoken about, but critically always going through a very serious and rigorous design process, co-design process, to then eventually create streets and networks with spaces for congregation, actually there was a drain for a 100-year flood that you can see coming in through here. And I just want to end very quickly with what is beginning to develop and looking at what this network change means. We just recently signed an MOU with the County of Embu to really look at an adaptive green infrastructure-led nature-based solution initiative for an overall landscape plan. And that's this was just actually this month that it's been done. The first test project was successful, and we're now looking into greater collaboration. And then with the Urban Fabrics initiatives, this is along with AFD, the Kenya Urban Slum Upgrading, Nairobi County, where we actually signed an MOU looking at how we can begin to network some of the, and leverage some of the lessons learned. Really, I would say, lessons learned from design. And one of the things I normally like to end with is just thinking that the impact of the design that started from the very small project has now come and ended in a situation where we're beginning to engage further at a larger scale, but always remembering that the smallest scale happens. And this is our friend Gaz from Kibera, who always reminds us that the world needs dreamers who do. So thank you very much. I hope I crammed that into 15 minutes, just a little bit more.
Thank you so much, Arthur. That was a really interesting presentation. My name is Victor. I'm a second year MAC 1 student at the Graduate School of Design. So you've taken us through like a historical arc of Nairobi and its neighborhoods, and I really like how you pointed out that Kibera came out of this operation of segregation, and that's how it's been left behind. So I'd want to understand your take on places left behind. What does that actually mean to you?
Wow. I think one of the things that I really thought of early on when we're discussing places left behind is places left behind both in time and in act. And to really begin to understand when a place was left behind is one of the only ways that you can really begin to conceive how to bring it back into the fold. Because as long as the structural issues that led towards a place being left behind, either by design or really just by omission, you'd really not be able to make that change. And so when you really ask me what a place left behind is, it might be a place that you're really carrying along with you and living with you, but you've never really looked at keenly to understand what the overall impacts could be and how you could. I think I'm speaking a little bit to Kibera now and not just other places, but how you could really engage and include all places. Yeah. I hope I've answered your question.
No, yeah, you definitely have. And I think while you were talking, I was thinking about the presentation and also how you're picking up random, like not random, but certain points in time where, you know, the people have experienced this reality, and you're engaging with them and trying to create another reality with them. So I really appreciate your presentation. Thank you again. And now we want to have another, let's have another perspective on places left behind, shared by Zeerak Ahmed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all. My name is Zeerak Ahmed. I'm MDE class of 2018. I'm in Seattle, Washington right now, but I would like to take you to another place, Lahore, Pakistan. If you walk through Lahore, you'll see signs that are in both English and Urdu. Urdu is the lingua franca of Pakistan, and English is a legacy that we've inherited from the British Raj in the Indian subcontinent. It's interesting that even though most people don't speak English, important signs have started ending up appearing in English. Questions of safety, infrastructure, you'll begin to see more and more in English across the city of Lahore. As you go into the richer parts of town, the Urdu seems to disappear and more English begins to appear. And here you're beginning to see this notion of class and this notion of historical path dependence on the creation of the city and the languages used in the city. And I want to talk specifically about the languages used in the city and how it is the languages that have been left behind. Every few years, you'll see a news report about the Pakistani education system. This news report is from 2015, where the then Minister for Planning proposed a new medium of education that was a blend of English and Urdu. His proposal was that this was get rid of the controversy around English medium and Urdu medium, which is how we refer to schools that are in English or in Urdu, that had damaged education standards. And his proposal was that the Urdu language would be used for all general instruction, but that English would be used for all technical vocabulary. And so the question is, how is Urdu, a language that had been around for hundreds of years, why is it incapable of generating new technical vocabulary that could describe science, engineering, and other fields of humanities? So I'm trying to unravel this in some way. This is an image of one of the largest newspapers in the country. It's the largest Urdu newspaper in the country. And up top, you'll see this dense calligraphic set of news reports. And at the bottom, you'll see quite often reports or advertisements about new infrastructure. These new infrastructures are often funded by foreign entities that are investing in the country. And announcements of new infrastructure often tend to be in English, even in an Urdu newspaper. Again, this is showing you the divides of language and class, and what language is considered a language of progress and what language is considered a language of everyday life. But there's an even more interesting story about this newspaper. Until the 1980s, or the late 1980s, this newspaper was written by hand every day by an army of calligraphers and then lithographed. They did this until in the mid-1980s when they came up with a new typeface known as Nuri Nastaliq. They kept building this typeface for a while and got to the point where they were finally felt that it was good enough. And the only way they could convince their audience that a typeset newspaper was still legible was printing a half handwritten and a half typeset newspaper. So this image that you're seeing is handwritten on the left, typeset on the right. And that's the only way they could convince people that the typeface was good enough to actually start typesetting the newspaper and not use an army of calligraphers every day. This is despite the Pakistani government's nearly 30-year investment into building printing infrastructure for Urdu. You'll see also that when the new typeface was built, it was built in a way where you couldn't type new words in it. And so it only could type words that it knew in the Urdu language. So questions such as trauma or split personality are written in English instead of being written in Urdu, either transliterated or with new technical vocabulary. This typeface was built in the 1980s. around the time when information technology was appearing. And information technology is the one field that has zero technical vocabulary in the Urdu language. And I find that these facts are probably intertwined and one probably led to another. If you build a printing technology in which you can't come up with new words and then you stop coming up with new words, the two factors seem pretty related to me. And so this is, for me, the goal to get behind. Just how do we start unraveling this? How do we start unraveling these questions of language and class and science? The interesting thing is when you start unraveling the history of language technology as a whole. And so as part of my work at the GSD, I started doing this sort of thing, and we found something really interesting. In the 1450s, the Gutenberg Bible comes to Europe, but it takes about 300 years for this printing technology to extend to the Arabic script. The Arabic script is what the Urdu language is written in, so these stories are pretty intertwined. So why does it take about 300 years for print to extend from the Latin script to the Arabic script? The historians early on used to believe that this was just the Ottoman Empire's aversion to the world of print and how it might undermine their power. But over time, we've changed our opinions of what happened here. And our belief is that more so than just the power structures at the time, it was just that the technology was not good enough for printing Arabic. The way that it printed and the fact was illegible to most readers of the Arabic script, and also that print as a whole didn't understand the culture of education in the Arabic script, where most people would go find a teacher and become their pupil, as opposed to reading a book and reading a text that was statically stuck in time. And so what we're seeing in the world of the Arabic script and in this region of the world broadly is that technology is often built for the Latin script or for English and then retrofitted for other languages, thereby missing some of the cultural nuance that could have been involved in the construction of the technology itself. Here's another example. The first Siamese typewriter was built by a European. The way it was built is that they took the Siamese alphabet and retrofitted it onto a typewriter that had enough keys for lowercase and uppercase English letters. Unfortunately, the typewriter had 2 less keys than the Siamese alphabet, and so they just yanked 2 letters off. And to this day, those 2 letters are unused in the language. And so these simple decisions that appear kind of just problem solving for most technologists end up dramatically affecting cultures decades down the line. This has social and academic effects also. While I was doing my research, I would run into technical experts, say in political science, and they'd like to go do some work studying political patterns in Pakistan. But unfortunately, because of the kind of colonial structure of education, they grew up in English-speaking schools, as a result of which they had no grasp of Urdu technical idioms. So how would you go ask questions about political science to someone that doesn't speak English if you yourself have no idea how to reference those terms in Urdu? So what you do is you find a translator. But the technology is so bad that this translator knows the Urdu language, but really can't figure out the typing technology or anything else. So they can help you convert your survey into the Urdu language, but they can't really type it out. So they hire a typist who knows neither the technology nor the language really, but just knows how to type. And by the time it gets to the consumer and then gets translated back into English, all your data is kind of somewhat diluted. And do we really know what's happening in cultures if we have to go through these many layers of translation? My goal is to undercut this. How do we make it easier to write in the Urdu language? And how do we make software better for the world outside of the English-speaking world? So the question was, how do we look at the nature of the Arabic script as a whole and see what emerges from it? So let's not start by the English language. Let's start by the design of the Arabic script itself. And so here I'll take you into the Arabic script. So bear with me. The Arabic script is built on 3 layers. So we'll go right to left because the Arabic script is written right to left. So we'll start with the little blue shape on the right. The little blue shape on the right is the letter Ha, and it's written with one little basic shape. As we add dots, here known as the ijam in the center, as we add different dots in and around the shape, they make different consonant sounds. So the sounds here are j, ch, and kh. And then we can add another layer of tashkil, as they're known, that add pronunciation. And so you would know what vowel to add after the letter. So there's an inherent layering of shapes within the Arabic script that opens up a new door for us. And so what we can do is, if we're building a new typing technology, we can group these letters by shape. And instead of having a separate key for each of them, we could begin to group them all together. So what that does is, you start typing, you pick your basic shapes, and the dots are added automatically. This makes it much easier to type. And when I say much easier to type, I'd like you to compare it to the normal alphabetical keyboard that you'd get for the Urdu language. Urdu is about 40 letters. So the shape-based keyboard that we've just designed, starting from the Arabic script as a base, is on the left, which has about 21 keys. And then on the right is the normal alphabetical keyboard, which has nearly 40 keys, almost double the letters. What does this transition accomplish? What it's able to do is that people that are in their 60s or 70s that have never learned to type, or children that are only learning to type, will look at this keyboard and just be way less intimidated by it, and are just much more likely to be able to start typing in the Urdu language. And so people that have grown up being educated in the English language, just completely devoid of any vocab or immersion in the Urdu language, are just less likely to be stuck in that and more likely to be able to speak their own native language in the digital sphere. For me, this pattern is repeated everywhere. As the pandemic started, we saw children in the US being left out of remote learning. Digital broadband is inadequately or inequitably distributed across the US. And so kids in poorer neighborhoods just had less access to internet that would allow them to learn just as quickly in the classroom. And we saw that digital divide growing. This pattern is beginning to show up in policing. We know that predictive policing algorithms find people with dark skin to be more likely to be on the wrong side of things. We know this exact same pattern occurs even with something as benign as photofilm, which was designed for lighter colored skin, but not for darker colored skin. Even something as simple as emoji preempts and propagates stereotypes about different cultures. And so these little seemingly simple and benign constructions of technology around us continue to propagate differences in culture and cultural access to technology, leaving entire cultural practices far behind. In my day job, I work with warehouse workers and van drivers. And so as we talk to them and try to make our products better to use, we use often sometimes a system usability test known as the system usability scale. This is an industry standard test that's fairly commonly understood by the user experience research community. In it are a set of questions that you expect to ask of any product and build a score around a product as you talk to consumers. And so question 8 here is, I found the system very cumbersome to use. And you'd get a rating from whoever you're talking to, and they'd give you a rating, yes or no. And then you'd convert that into a score. Unfortunately, warehouse workers are not a traditional audience of the American tech industry. And so what that means is that we haven't really understood the cultural environment that we are building for. And is this test really even built for them? And the question I got from a warehouse worker was, what does cumbersome mean? This is not a foreign non-English speaking worker. This is a Native American, a person native to the US who grew up here, speaks English, and just didn't know what the word cumbersome mean, because literacy levels in lower income populations that wouldn't be traditional users of expensive technology are just been left out of our entire construction of how we build technology. And things that we take for granted and things that we consider are standard are in fact continuously propagated. The entire system of building technology that we've constructed systematically leaves people out. So I want to leave you with a few really basic lessons. How do we start building technology that prevents this from propagating even further? What I like to tell people is to look for the path that got us here. For me, the story of building new technology for the Urdu language starts in the 1450s. How do we prevent that same delay of new technology spreading to the Arabic script repeat again? What is it that we can do? So studying that history is really important. it's useful to identify the blind spots that it creates. Often when technology is built in one way, we forget to believe that there could have been another way around. If you study the history of the Chinese language and the technology that's built there, you realize there's a whole parallel path of how technology could have been built. And so for most designers, there's a goal to just have some imagination, see what other world we could have lived in if we start from a different place. And then don't be afraid to throw away bad foundations. Most of the technology we built is built by people like us. We've made tons of mistakes, and there's no reason that we can consider it standard. We can come up with new things. In the world that we live in right now, with software and smartphones and good processing, you can really build anything. And I like to encourage people to be able to do that. And the last thing I leave with is that we have a tendency as designers to build provocations, to show good ideas that present a new world, but that can't be built. And there's a way forward where we can build not just provocations, but good designs that can actually be built. And collaborating with people that can help build our ideas or help learning to build our own ideas and actually pushing them forward and engaging with the communities that we work with is really the way forward. And I'm really glad to be part of a conversation where the two speakers before me have shown exactly how that could be done, how we could build new infrastructure that could bring these places forward with us. Those are my lessons. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zeerak, for your stimulating presentation. Coming from India, it was incredibly relatable for me, as the education system and the social hierarchy, specifically the technical part of the education system, is still colonized despite almost 78 years of independence. So just to summarize, it would be great if you could tell us what Places Left Behind means to you.
For me, I think it's pretty clear that when we build technology sitting in America, or there's a few other centers in the world, we think of our regions first and we don't think of other regions, but the impact tends to be pretty broad. All technology that's built in America affects the world, but doesn't necessarily consider non-American customers just as valuable. We're seeing this now in the creation of the AI tools. The data they know is predominantly American and predominantly English speaking, so they're just worse in other languages. And what that means is that either we expect people to deal with worse technology, or we expect them to give up their language and start speaking in English. And what I'm noticing in Pakistan is that a new generation of kids just know that speaking English is the only way forward, and they'd much rather forget all of their culture behind and just learn to become American. And for me, finding a way to kind of undo that and finding little ways of undoing that to break the sort of systematic structure that we've created is the thing that we all need to do.
Wow, that was very interesting. I think this idea of focusing on the systems that actually have been put in place is something that I think designers should be taking a look into. But I think this idea of focusing on the infrastructure is provocative in its own way. I think it has an effect on multiple generations of people who are using this technology, especially with the typing. I think language is a very interesting concept. This idea that it packs in a lot of cultural value and meaning, and technology can easily erase it or amplify it is very interesting. I think in terms of Places Left Behind, I would find it interesting to think about my own experience. Places Left Behind to me is more about the people being left behind because they don't have access to certain types of technology or certain skills or knowledge on how to do things. Or maybe they do, but in some way they do get left behind. And I think as designers, we do have some sort of obligation to think about those people that have been left behind. Spurty, I would really like to hear your take on what Places Left Behind means.
Well, for me, Places Left Behind means the indigenous knowledge that informs planning, architecture, and landscape that has evolved as a byproduct of human adaptation to their physical and social environments. And our disconnection from this indigenous knowledge in many contexts, and of course, like it takes me back to what Zeerak was talking. He was talking about language, and I'm talking about the same thing, but in a more physical sense in terms of our infrastructure, our built environment, and also our curated landscapes. And so I was obviously very intrigued by Mark's unique perspective on the economic hardships of former mining communities in Czech Republic and pivoting their conditions by repairing the natural landscapes, hence allowing them to be productive. And then there was Arthur's perspective of socially and politically engineered places left behind in Kibera, Kenya, and the development of these network of productive public spaces to heal these social fractures. It is interesting how both of these cases, despite being so unique in their context and approach, have their roots in community economic upliftment that was informed by community values and ecological restoration. So, which again ties back to what you were talking about, and how, how the community values. And if you could talk more about this, I mean, I'm pretty interested to know more about what you were talking about, the community perspectives in terms of design decisions.
Yeah, for sure. I think involving community really, you get to now understand the history of the area, just as Zeerak and also Arthur have been mentioning. And as well, like it leads to understanding the community leads to an economic uplift and also a some sort of social productivity within the areas, the different areas. I think the common theme around all the presentations has been productive landscapes and the different meanings of productivity. That to me has been very interesting. At this point, I would like to invite Stacey to kindly talk through the closing remarks of this event. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Victor. And thank you, Spurty. Let's see. Am I on? Okay. Design impact is a celebration of the power of design, the translation between the ethos of design thinking and the opportunities to beautifully effectuate change. The Harvard Graduate School of Design both harnesses and explodes the curriculum of design through the lens of a variety of degrees, including urban planning, urban design, architecture, landscape architecture, and real estate, to name a few. As an alumni council, we often reflect on a few motifs. The strength of multidisciplinary collaboration. The beauty of this profession is centered around the fact that perspectives matter. The power of collaboration can be both overwhelming and enlightening. The power of scale, ranging from finite detail and the composition of material to regional and global patterns and systems. And the idea of democratizing design thinking. We, by default, speak in design jargon often, but challenge ourselves to align our language with the universality of the ideas and power of design. So the thing is, everyone knows of a place left behind, whether a childhood home, a medieval village, or an area devastated by climate change. The connective glue is the commonality, not the rarity. I find this topic to be particularly meaningful due to the ways that it encapsulates all that is fleeting, impermanent, and emotional, as well as all that is tangible, physical, and spatial, and the interrelationship between the two, which leads me to a few questions. Do places store memories in their spatial existence? Do places store memories for people, whether at the scale of an individual, family, neighborhoods, or cultures? This is just the beginning of an exploration of the topic, Places Left Behind. I'd like to take a minute as we conclude the program to acknowledge and thank my co-chair, Wiig. Today's program is the result of great collaboration and dialogue. Also, I'd like to extend a special thanks to Sarah M. Whiting, the Dean of the Harvard Graduate School of Design, as well as the talented team who supports the work and engagement of the Alumni Council. And of course, Mark, Arthur, Zeerak, Spurty, Victor, and Michelle. We are thrilled to engage with such a global audience and invite you to stay tuned for the next Design Impact Places Left Behind virtual program. Please join us via Instagram at GSD_AC and share your insights regarding the topic. Thank you so much for joining us today, and have a wonderful rest of your morning, evening, or afternoon, wherever in the world this finds you. Take care.